All right, so now Maine has removed the orange bastard from the, or I should say the orange antichrist. Who thought the antichrist would be orange, who would use paint on his face every day? I mean, well, I guess that's what you expect of an antichrist. Crazed, just crazed. But Maine's top election official, the Secretary of State there, a person named Shenna Bellows, removed the orange bastard from the Maine 2024 primary ballot in a decision that's obviously based on paragraph 3 of the 14th Amendment that bars people who try to overthrow the government of the United States from seeking office to run the government of the United States. I mean, this is insane. This whole goddamn thing is insane. I don't think there has ever been, it's not a matter of not thinking, there has never been a wrecking ball taken to our democratic system, as frail as it is, as awkward as it is, as unsuccessful as it has been in fulfilling what the framers had in mind, as this bastard Donald Trump. It's just astonishing. Now, the Secretary of State paused her decision pending a potential appeal in state court. It's a little bit different there. What she's referring to is the equivalent of normal state Supreme Court. In Trump's collection of monsters and Nazis, including this filthy pig Stephen Chung. Wait till you hear what he had to say about it. These people don't understand irony. They just don't. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. She said, the Secretary of State of Maine said she's suspending her own, or pausing her own decision to give the Trump bastards a chance to appeal to a higher court, to a court in the state of Maine. So this makes Maine the second state to disqualify the Antichrist from running for office, following Colorado. Now, this ruling by the Maine Supreme Court, obviously it's going to be challenged. We know this, and we know pretty much how the U.S. Supreme Court is going to rule. We just do. The Supreme Court right now, U.S. Supreme Court, is chock-a-block with perjurers, hypocrites, grifters, liars, and cheats. 6 of them. So while it's not a good idea to make political predictions ever, because things can, as they say, turn on a dime, I feel rather secure in saying that the Supreme Court is going to rule that the 14th Amendment insurrection clause does not apply to their Lord and Master, the Antichrist, Donald Jesus Trump. Count on it. But in the meantime, we have these little court cases to provide us the entertainment that we should not be forced to watch. The Secretary of State, and this is so important, she's a Democrat, and she issued that decision yesterday after presiding over an administrative hearing earlier this month about Trump's criminal actions and his ineligibility for the office of the presidency. And a bipartisan group of former state lawmakers, this often gets lost, but Republicans and Democrats filed the challenge against Trump. But according to Trump, and his pukey states spokespeople, scum like Stephen Chung or the Nazi Jew Stephen Miller or the Nazi Christian Steve Bannon. Why do these people all have the name Steve? You ever notice that? It's weird. Anyway, they had their response. And like I said, I'll get to that in a second. But this is what the Secretary of State, Maine, wrote in her decision. Quote, "I do not reach this conclusion lightly. Democracy is sacred. I am mindful that no Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I am also mindful, however, that no presidential candidate has ever before engaged in insurrection, end quote. And that's the key. You see, it's not what secretaries of state are doing. It's not what legislatures are doing. It's what this son of a bitch Donald Trump did. He is the criminal. He is the instigator. He is the person who has set up this attempt to crash and burn democracy in this country. Now, most legal experts believe that the Supreme Court is going to settle this issue once and for all, like they settled Roe v. Wade once and for all, right? But anyway, until that happens, the Maine decision is building on the momentum that normal people in this country, that would be people who look at Trump and see a goddamn reincarnation of Adolf Hitler. Trump critics, they've claimed after the Colorado ruling, this momentum to stop this son of a bitch. Now, before the Colorado decision, of course, several other states like Michigan and Minnesota rejected similar efforts. I think the Michigan rejection was just last week, wasn't it? I think so. And it's my understanding that California's Secretary of State released a certified list of candidates last night, actually. And that list included the Orange Antichrist. So he's going to be on the ballot in California. Now, that kind of pissed off some of the Democratic officials in the state of California who were wanting to remove the Orange Antichrist name from the California ballot, but it's going to be there. So, and here's a statement that was released, yesterday from Stephen Cheung. Stephen Cheung accused the Maine Secretary of State of having a, quote, virulent leftist view who has now decided to interfere in the presidential election. I mean, just that's all you have to hear before your gag reflex kicks in. What do you mean interfere in the presidential election, you son of a bitch? That's what that's what the Antichrist has been doing ever since Joe Biden kicked his ass. But this is also what Cheung said, quote, Democrats in blue states are recklessly and unconstitutionally suspending the civil rights of the American voters by attempting to summarily remove President Trump's name from the ballot. Pant, pant, puff, puff. Jesus God. Now, in her decision, Secretary Bellows concluded that she has a legal obligation, not a legal option, but a legal obligation to do what the 14th Amendment's insurrectionist ban says and remove the Orange Antichrist from that state's primary ballot. Secretary Bellows said this, quote, the oath I swore to uphold the Constitution comes first above all. And my duty under Maine's election laws is to ensure that candidates who appear on the primary ballot are qualified for the office they seek, end quote. Now, you can chuckle and giggle and hoot at that last part. Trump is no more qualified to be on the ballot than, I don't know, my just turned 12-year-old niece. Although I think my niece would probably be, this is my granddaughter. I have several. My 12-year-old granddaughter is intellectually, emotionally, morally more capable, more qualified to appear on the main ballot than this orange Nazi Antichrist Donald Trump. But I digress. Explaining her reasoning, Ms. Bellows wrote that the challenge presented compelling evidence that the January 6th insurrection, I'm quoting from CNN, the January 6th insurrection, quote, occurred at the behest of Trump and that the U.S. Constitution does not tolerate an assault on the foundations of our government, end quote. Well, now that sounds rather rational and logical and reasonable and correct, doesn't it? But we're not dealing in that arena. We're dealing in this insane space that Donald Trump and the filth around him have created. Ms. Bellows also wrote this, quote, "The record establishes that Mr. Trump, over the course of several months and culminating on January 6, 2021, used a false narrative of election fraud to inflame his supporters and direct them to the Capitol to prevent certification of the 2020 election and the peaceful transfer of power. I likewise conclude," Ms. Bellows went on, "that Mr. Trump was aware of the likelihood for violence and at least initially supported its use, given he both encouraged it with incendiary rhetoric and took no timely action to stop it." End quote. Now, Ms. Bellows, Secretary of State there, said her decision yesterday will be put on hold until Maine's Superior Court, which actually is it's not equivalent of a Supreme Court, state Supreme Court. In Maine, the Superior Court is a trial-level court. They can actually listen to prosecution points of view and defense points of view and make a decision, along with the assistance, I would assume, in some cases, of a jury. Also, in her decision, the Maine Secretary of State, Ms. Bellows, said she had, quote, "little trouble," end quote, "concluding that the U.S. Capitol riot meets the definition of an insurrection and that Trump, quote, "intended to incite lawless action to stop the transfer of power," end quote. And on that day, Ms. Bellows wrote, on January 6, 2021, she wrote this, quote, "A large and angry crowd entered the Capitol and assaulted the Capitol police officers charged with defending it, vandalized and stole property, and ransacked offices," end quote. And then she added that members of this mob of filthy pigs, I added the filthy pigs, were, quote, "organized behind a common purpose to prevent by force the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election that was scheduled to occur in the halls of Congress that afternoon," end quote. And then she, in a way, she was echoing the decision of the Colorado Supreme Court that threw this orange Nazi off the ballot. Ms. Bellows said that Trump spread lies of election fraud to, quote, "inflame his supporters and direct them to the Capitol to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. The weight of the evidence makes clear that Mr. Trump was aware of the tinder laid by his multi-month effort to delegitimize a democratic election and then chose to light a match," end quote. And she added this, quote, "Principles of free speech do not override the clear command of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, namely that those who orchestrate violence against our government may not wield the levels of its power," end quote. Woo! Well, here we are. It'll be up to the United States Supreme Court now. I would, well, not that I would assume. Obviously, it's going to be up to the U.S. Supreme Court because the orange Antichrist is going to take it to the U.S. Supreme Court on appeal. And the Supreme Court has to make a decision like this when you have such massive differences among the states as to what constitutes legitimate exercise of the rules and regs of how someone's elected or whatever. So we must brace ourselves for more of this Trump goddamn insanity. I mean, think about this. Ever since, 2015, when this filthy, rotten, subhuman Antichrist, 2015, We're coming up on 9 years we've had this son of a bitch eating away inside of our conscious minds, devouring hours of necessary news time on television, in newspapers, to get information to us that we really need. But we've had to focus on this filthy pig Donald Trump. If I were a praying person, if I believed in any kind of divine intervention, I would be on my knees every night with my face uplifted to the heavens, my hands folded in front of me, begging the God of the universe to rid us of this filthy, filthy Antichrist. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.